police officer's face was a stony mask, impossible to read. He stood on my porch, his hand resting casually on his hip, just inches from his sidearm. My wife, Anna, stood beside me, unnervingly calm. Her posture perfect, her gaze locked on the woman standing on my lawn, and that woman, Brenda. She was the very picture of righteous fury. Her finger was pointed straight at Anna, trembling with indignation. "She has been living here for weeks, officer." Brenda's voice was shrill, cutting through the quiet mountain air. "She is not on the deed. She has not been approved by the board. She is an unauthorized tenant, a squatter. Our bylaws are perfectly clear. You have to remove her." My heart was hammering against my ribs. I tried to speak to defend my own wife and my own home, but the words caught in my throat. The officer turned his head slightly, his eyes shifting. From Brenda's frantic face to Anna's calm one, seemed to be weighing the situation. The hysterical HOA president versus the quiet couple on the porch. But Brenda had the rule book, the official complaint, the air of authority she wore like a general's uniform. We just had the truth, and in that moment, the truth felt flimsy and weak. He took a small step forward, looking directly at Anna. And that's when everything went wrong. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment. What would you do if this happened to you? And subscribe to HOA Files. My story really begins with a cabin, small, simple A-frame, tucked away in a quiet, wooded community called Lakeside Pines. I bought it 15 years ago as an escape. I'm a novelist, and the city was killing my creativity. I needed silence, trees, the sound of wind instead of sirens. Lakeside Pines was perfect. It was an older community, built in the 70s, full of quirky individual cabins around a small, peaceful lake. The HOA was, well, it was barely there. We paid a small fee once a year to maintain the private road and the community dock, and that was it. It was a place for recluses and nature lovers, not for rule followers. We had an unspoken code: keep to yourself, be a good neighbor, and don't be a jerk. For 14 years, it worked beautifully. Then Brenda moved in. She bought the cabin across the loop from me, tore it down, and built a massive gray modern box that looked completely out of place among the rustic A-frames. And with her, she brought the city. The noise, the judgment, and most of all, the rules. Within 6 months, she'd gotten herself elected HOA president on a platform of improving community standards. Suddenly, our relaxed live-and-let-live community had a dictator. Mailboxes had to be a uniform color. Holiday decorations had to be approved. Wind chimes were deemed a noise pollutant. Brenda patrolled the gravel roads in her oversized SUV, a clipboard on her passenger seat searching for infractions. The soul of the place began to wither, but I had bigger things on my mind. See, for most of the time I'd owned the cabin. I'd been in a long-distance relationship. My wife, Anna, is, well, she's incredible. She's also a major in the United States Army. For over a decade, our life together had been a series of stolen weekends, crackly phone calls from halfway around the world, and long, painful goodbyes. She was always on the move: deployments to Afghanistan, postings in Germany, training exercises all over the country. The cabin was our anchor, the one place that was ours. Even if she could only be there a few weeks a year. But that was all about to change. After 20 years of service, Anna was finally retiring. She was coming home. For good. The thought of it was a constant shimmering joy in my chest. No more goodbyes. No more counting down the days. Just us. In our cabin. Together I spent weeks getting ready. I cleared out the room I used for storage and turned it into a proper office for her. I built a raised garden bed in the sunniest part of the yard because she'd always talked about wanting to grow her own tomatoes. I was so wrapped up in my happiness, I barely paid Brenda and her new reign of terror any mind. That was a mistake. She cornered me one afternoon while I was hauling bags of soil for the garden bed. Her SUV pulled up, and she got out, clipboard in hand. "Robert," she said, her tone clipped and official. "I see you're doing some landscaping. Just building a small vegetable patch, Brenda," I said, forcing a polite smile. This modification approved by the Architectural Review Committee, she asked, tapping her pen on her clipboard. I stared at her. The what? Brenda, it's a 3 by 6 foot wooden box for tomatoes. All exterior modifications, no matter how minor, require a formal submission and approval, she stated flatly. It's in the bylaws. Section C, paragraph 4. She peered past me at the cabin. I've also noticed a lot of activity. Here lately, you're clearing out rooms. Out. Are you planning on renting the property out? Because all long-term tenants must be registered with the HOA and undergo a background check. The invasiveness of the question stunned me. Oh, Brenda, I'm not getting a tenant. My wife is coming home to live with me. She blinked, a flicker of something confusion, suspicion. In her eyes, your wife. Why, she said the word like it was a foreign concept. I guess in the 14 years she hadn't been there, none of the neighbors had ever really seen. Anna. Yes, my wife. She's retiring from the military. I see, she said slowly, making a note on her clipboard. Well, be sure to add her vehicle to the community register as soon as it arrives. She gave the new garden bed one last disapproving look and then drove off. I felt a chill despite the warm sun. She wasn't just a busybody, she was a gatekeeper. And she had just been put on notice that someone new was coming through her gate. 2 weeks later, Anna arrived. The moment I saw her car turn down our little road, I felt like I could finally breathe. The reunion was everything I dreamed. We spent the next few days in a blissful bubble, walking by the lake, cooking together, just talking for hours on end. It was perfect. Our life was finally starting. Then the first notice appeared, tucked under my windshield wiper. It was a bright, orange slip of paper, looking alarmingly like a parking ticket. Official notice of violation, it read in bold black letters. The violation? Unauthorized vehicle parked in driveway? It listed Anna's car model and license plate. At the bottom, a line was checked. Vehicle must be registered with the HOA within 48 hours or be removed from the community. I crumpled it up, my blood starting to simmer. This was ridiculous, but I decided to handle it calmly. I walked over to Brenda's house, the crumpled notice in my hand. She answered the door with a smug little smile, as if she'd been expecting. Me, Brenda, you left this on my wife's car, I said, holding it out. I told you she was moving in. This is her car. Has she registered it yet? Brenda asked, not missing a beat. We've been busy getting her settled. It's been 3 days. The bylaws are clear, she said, her voice devoid of any human warmth. Furthermore, as your wife is not on the original property deed, she is technically classified as a long-term resident. Such, she needs to submit a formal application to the board. There's a $200 application fee and a mandatory background check. I felt the world tilt a little. A background check. It's for my wife to live in her own home. It's for the safety and security of the community. Robert, she said condescendingly, as if explaining something to a simple child, we need to know who is living here. We don't know anything about this person. The rage that surged through me was hot and swift. This person is my wife, Brenda. She's a major in the United States Army. I think the community is pretty safe with her in it. I am not paying you $200 or submitting my wife to a background check. That is the most insulting, insane thing I have ever heard. Brenda's face hardened. Then she is in violation of the covenants. And so are you for harboring an unauthorized resident. If you refuse to comply, the board will have no choice but to take further action. Good day. She shut the door in my face. That's when the siege began. Brenda was relentless. A notice appeared on our door because Anna's welcome mat, a simple black mat that said welcome, was a non-approved color and design. Another one came because the small American flag Anna had put in her new garden bed was not flown in a board-approved manner. We got a violation for leaving our porch light on past 10 p.m., which was apparently light pollution. It was a constant, petty, psychological assault. Brenda's SUV would be parked down the road, just watching our house. She was trying to break us, Anna, to her credit, was trying to take it in stride. Honey, "I've dealt with a lot worse than a crazy lady with a clipboard," she'd say with a small smile. But I could see the toll it was taking. Well, this was supposed to be her sanctuary after 2 decades of service, a place of peace. Instead, she was being harassed and made to feel like an intruder. It was making me furious. This was my home, my wife, and I felt powerless to protect her from this petty tyrant. The breaking point came on a Thursday afternoon. I was on a deadline, locked in my office writing. Anna went to walk down to the community mailboxes to get our mail. I watched from the window as Brenda's SUV swooped in and cut her off, blocking her path. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could see Brenda's aggressive posture, her finger jabbing the air. Anna just stood there, her arms crossed, listening. The confrontation lasted a few minutes before Brenda sped off in a cloud of gravel dust. When Anna came back inside, her face was pale, her jaw tight. "What did she say?" I asked, my own hands clenched. "The usual," Anna said, trying to sound casual. She demanded to know why I hadn't submitted my application. She called me a freeloader. Said I was putting the entire community at risk. And I took a deep breath. And then she said if I wasn't gone by the end of the week, she was going to have me forcibly removed for trespassing. So that was it, the final straw. Before I could even respond, before we could even decide what to do, we heard a knock at the door, not a neighborly knock, a loud, firm, official knock. I opened it to find 2 county sheriff's deputies standing on my porch. And behind them, on my lawn, stood Brenda, her arms crossed, a look of ultimate triumph on her face. And that's how we ended up here, on my porch being accused of harboring a criminal. The older officer, the one who seemed to be in charge, had a patient but weary look on his face. He had clearly dealt with HOAs before. "Sir, ma'am," he said, his voice neutral, "we've received a complaint of an unauthorized individual residing at this address. In violation of the community covenants, Ms. Miller here claims she's repeatedly asked the unauthorized person to leave, and she has refused. She's my wife," I finally managed to say, my voice raw. "She's not an unauthorized person. She's my wife. You can't prove that," Brenda yelled from the lawn. "Her name isn't on any of the official documents. All we know, she could be anyone, a drifter. She refuses to identify herself to the board." The officer held up a hand to silence Brenda, a flash of annoyance in his eyes. He turned back to us. "Look, I'm not here to enforce HOA rules about welcome mats, but a trespassing complaint is something I have to follow up on. Ma'am, do you have some identification I could see?" This was it, the moment of humiliation. Being forced to prove our own identity, our own marriage, on our own porch, all because of this hateful woman. Brenda's smirk grew wider, she thought. She had us. She thought she'd won. But Anna was a rock. She just gave a calm, simple nod. "Of course, officer," she said. "Let me get my wallet." She turned and went inside, leaving me and the officers in a tense silence. Brenda was practically vibrating with anticipation. Anna returned a moment later. What? She opened her wallet, but she didn't pull out her driver's license. She carefully slid out a different card and handed it to the officer. He took it, glanced at it, and then froze. He looked down at the ID again, his eyes widening slightly. He looked up at Anna, his entire demeanor shifting in an instant. The weary, semi-annoyed cop was gone, replaced by someone showing a sudden, profound respect. He looked from the ID in his hand to Anna's face, then over at Brenda, who was watching, confused by the sudden change in atmosphere. There was a full 10 seconds of complete silence. The officer cleared his throat, turned his body, positioning himself so he was squarely facing Brenda. "Ma'am," he said, his voice now laced with steel. "Ms. Miller, are you aware of the Service Members Civil Relief Act?" Brenda's smug expression faltered. The what?" "The SCRA." The officer continued, his voice low and serious. "It's a federal law. It provides a wide range of protections for active duty military personnel. That includes protections against harassment and eviction. This woman," he said, gesturing with his head towards Anna, but without taking his eyes off Brenda, is Major Anna Thompson of the United States Army. He held up the military ID, and attempting to interfere with the housing of a service member or their spouse is a very, very serious federal issue. It goes way above and beyond your little HOA bylaws. The color drained from Brenda's face. It was magnificent. She went from smug red to chalky, terrified white in a heartbeat. She started to stammer. I didn't know. She's not. She just moved in. The younger officer, who had been quiet until now, stepped forward, flipping open his notepad. "So, Ms. Miller," he said conversationally, "you've been issuing violation notices to this residence? You confronted the major here and threatened to have her forcibly removed? And you filed this official complaint today, alleging she was a trespasser?" "It was a misunderstanding," Brenda squeaked, her voice now an octave higher. "I was just trying to follow our rules." "Filing a false police report is a misdemeanor, ma'am," the first officer said, his voice dangerously calm. "Using it as a tool to intimidate a military family, well, that could attract a whole different kind of attention. I'd suggest you go home right now. And I'd suggest the HOA board think very, very carefully about its next steps." Brenda looked like she'd been struck by lightning. She gave Anna one last look, a look of pure, unadulterated fear, then she turned and practically sprinted back to her house without another word. The two officers turned back to us. The older one handed Anna her ID back. Major Thompson on behalf of myself and the entire department, I sincerely apologize for this, he said. "Thank you for your service." "Thank you, officer," Anna said quietly. "You were just doing your job. We'll be having a chat with the rest of your HOA board about the SCRA," he added. "I have a feeling you won't be bothered." Again, they tipped their hats, gave us a nod, and left. The silence that descended on the porch was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. The quiet of the woods, the quiet of our home, had returned. I looked at Anna, and she looked at me, and we both just started to laugh. It was a laugh of relief, of shock, of pure, unadulterated vindication. In the end, it wasn't me who saved the day. It was Anna, not by arguing or fighting, but just by being who she is. Brenda, in her little kingdom of petty rules and imagined. Power had tried to take on someone whose entire life had been about real rules, real authority, and real consequences. She brought a clipboard to a gunfight she didn't even know was happening. The aftermath was swift. We never heard from Brenda again. Not a word, not a notice, not a single drive-by in her SUV. Word spread through the community like wildfire. A couple of the older neighbors, the ones from before Brenda's reign, came by to apologize for her behavior, bringing pies and offering handshakes. The HOA, we heard, had an emergency meeting. We finally had our life together. The garden thrived. The welcome mat stayed. We left the porch light on as late as we wanted. We found our peace. This ordeal taught me something profound. Petty tyrants feed on the fear and compliance of ordinary people. They build their little empires on flimsy rules and intimidation. But their power is an illusion, and it shatters the second it comes up against something real and true. You can't bully someone who has faced down threats far greater than a nasty letter. You just can't. We finally had our sanctuary back, quiet and calm. But I did hear that Brenda was forced to resign from the board in disgrace, and now I can't help but wonder who they'll elect to replace her.